Hey, I'm Shaye and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Today, we are visiting with Tim Petry about the cattle markets. This episode includes producer questions submitted by you, big picture conversations, as well as other current events. So turn up the volume a little and get ready for a lot of information to come your way, because Tim is an experienced professional in the cattle market and economic space at North Dakota State University, and he has a lot to share today. So, let's get to it. Hey folks, can I steal your attention away for less than a minute? Ranching is a business, and profitable ones don't happen by accident. If you're ready to run your operation with clarity, confidence, and a strategic plan, my new course, Profit Foundations for Ranchers, is built for you. You'll learn how to define measurable success for your ranch, identify where profit is slipping through the cracks, and put systems in place that help you make better decisions faster. This isn't the theory, it's a practical, ranch-tested business training designed to improve your bottom line. It's the same strategies I use on our own operation. Visit casualcattleconversations.com to learn more, and the direct link is in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the episode. All right, Tim, well, thank you for joining me today to talk about cattle markets, which has certainly been a hot topic this year, but especially in the last month and even weeks. So thank you for your time today.
Glad to be here, and yes, it is a hot topic, but I enjoy talking about it. That's what I spend 10 hours a day doing, is looking at the cattle market.
Absolutely. So help the listeners get to know you a little bit by sharing why you believe in the beef industry.
Okay, well, that's pretty simple for me to answer. I grew up in a ranch in northwestern North Dakota, and we had cattle, and one thing about cattle and what I do now that really intrigued me was how prices moved and so on. You know, that was a long time ago in the 50s and 60s, so there was no internet. We didn't even have electricity to begin with, but I was always intrigued by prices, and we did get the Minute Daily News like 2 days late or something, and sometimes they would have a little market report on there from, the West Fargo stockyards are big, and in the middle of the summer, I'd tell my dad, well, it looks like it's going to be a pretty good year, and he would just say, wait till fall gets here, and we'll see when we have calves to sell, and sure enough, they'd be lower then. So I'd say, why is that, Dad? Why we always have something to sell, prices seem to be low. And he said, well, you better go down to the AC, which is what we called NDSU back then, and learn about that. And so that's what I did, and ended up being in agricultural economics and studying prices, and I just loved it. After my bachelor's, spent a couple of years in the Army, and then back here for grad school, and I never intended to stay here. I thought I was going to work for a bank up in northwestern North Dakota, and the opportunity came, and I taught some classes and so on. So I've been here ever since, but my love is prices. Some people have a problem with prices because it's not an exact science. I like animal science too, and studied that, but there, feed 7 pounds of corn to a steer last year, this year, next year, and reason it's going to be about the same thing. But our prices are changing now as we speak, and it's not an exact science, but that's what I love about it. I can't wait to get here in the morning and see what's happening today. And so that's, the cattle business is alive and well. Yeah, it's very volatile now, but that's where my interest is, and I just love being in the cattle business.
All right. Well, and you are very much well respected in your area and around the state, because I always remember hearing you speak here and there at conferences growing up and still today. So to get started, for those listening, just so you know, we are recording this on November 17th. So whether you're listening right when it comes out, a few months later, etc., I just want to give you a time point for when this conversation is taking place. So on the bigger picture, Tim, what is really happening in the cattle markets that producers should be mindful of within the next 2, 4, 6 weeks?
Well, yeah, we've had a very, very volatile market lately, and there are many reasons for that we can talk about. But don't get worried about all the futures market is up the limit today or down the limit tomorrow. Let's concentrate on the cash market and the fundamentals affecting them. And I know producers like to get the highest price possible, but I think in volatile times here, it is not a time to change your marketing plan. I would stick with it. If you usually keep your calves till January, I think do that. We don't know what the market's going to do, but we do know that it's at record high levels and it's going to stay at pretty good levels. But if you're going to try to say, well, I'm going to hold till next week, or should I wait 2 weeks or something, that is not a good marketing plan. I think most producers are locked into selling at a certain time because of the resources they have, and if they wean calves and precondition them or even background them, or others don't have the room to do that and so they have to go to town, that is what you should continue to do, and not just jump to conclusions and say, well, they were down last week or this week, and just stick to your normal marketing, and then that you do the best you can.
So don't panic.
That's right. Do not panic.
And is that partially out of the reputation that producers build with when they typically sell? Is there more to that? Can you dive a little more into why you say, that don't panic, stick to your usual marketing plan?
Yeah, sure. Well, it's the resources you have, and some do plan the background, and they have feed available and need the feed. Have silage or whatever it might be, so you're locked in. That silage pile is going to be no good in a year, and so stick to that particular plan. And even we're getting close to 2026, and so if you usually sell now January is our biggest marketing month, and rightfully so, because calves are usually weaned by that time and bunk trained and so on, and so that alone adds value to them. But if you say, well, I don't know what the market's going to do and it's high enough now, and so I think I'll sell now, then you have 2 years of relatively high calf crop income tax to pay, for instance. So that's another consideration, that probably you don't sell 2 calf crops the same year. And so it's mainly the feed you have and what you usually do. And if you usually sell on this week, go ahead and do that, would be my recommendation.
When you say January is the biggest month, are you speaking for North Dakota or a specific or a larger region than that?
No, I am talking about North Dakota or the Northern Plains in particular. Many years ago, 25, 30 years ago, October and November would have been our big months, and that's before we did a lot of backgrounding like we do now, and understand preconditioning, and that the buyers prefer cattle that have been weaned and all those things, and so producers are just following what the market tells them. Kind of the other thing we're seeing a little bit is, for many years, calving dates kept moving earlier and earlier and year earlier. Pretty soon we're back in some cases almost to February. And I know purebred producers, they have a timeline there where they calve early and so on for their very good reason. But the commercial guys, because they wanted to have more weight in the fall, but then we have ran into, and still lately, very, very bad weather conditions for calving and calf loss, and you lose a calf, that's a big ticket item, the more percentage calf crop you sell. So we've been moving a calf date a little bit later back now again, and that may affect why we're going a little bit later. But I think the main thing is, calves have more value in January because they're weaned and bunk trained, and that's what the feedlots want.
Absolutely. So I know you've mentioned you've talked about that. Stick to your usual plan. Be cognizant of your resources, your finances, etc. Are there actions outside of that producers can take to capitalize on the current markets? Because sometimes sticking to the plan doesn't feel like taking action.
Absolutely. The last week, the range, and the USDA reports 3 markets in North Dakota. That's Napoleon, Mandan, and Dickinson. So that's a good I-94 section of prices. And so that's what we use as our prices. And last week, 550 to 6 weight steers ranged in price at those three markets, and very close days there, Wednesday and Thursday, ranged in price from 475 a hundredweight on the top end to 402 on the bottom end. That's a $73 range in prices for the same weight and grade of cattle at the same market. But that tells you there are other things besides weight and grade that affect cattle. Have they had their shots? Are they uniform? The more information you provide, the better. We're in the information age now, and so buyers want to know everything there is about them. So the old days of just hauling them into the sale barn, dropping them off, and forgetting about them is over. That you need to provide a lot of information, and the more information you provide, the better. And so if you're selling calves, let's get on the top of that market. Even on the average, we were at 438, but 475 a high there. And so I know average prices are really good now, but let's get them let's get on the top of the market and not leave that on the table. So that's one suggestion that I would do, and how to do that is, if nothing else, go in and talk to your auction market or wherever you sell and say, what is it that makes calves bring higher prices than others, and then do that.
Absolutely. And that's a topic that, well, actually I did a whole series on, not the podcast, but it was a whole Q&A series where ranchers could join, and we talked a lot about different ways to add value to calves and either communicate with sale barn representatives or private buyers, etc., about that information, and it makes a big difference.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so Tim, I put a post out on social media asking my listeners if they had questions about the cattle markets that they wanted me to ask. So if you don't mind, I polled 4 of those questions. Can we dive into some of those?
Yes, I certainly like questions, so let's do that.
Okay, so one of the first questions that was submitted is, what is the difference of price of beef at the grocery store pre-COVID versus today?
Well, like about everything that we buy, things have went up, and that's right. I know if we go back to 2020, which is COVID, for instance, USDA keeps track of beef prices at all levels, from the calves all the way up to beef prices. And so all fresh beef prices averaged in 2020 about $6 a pound. And last month, the average, were really 2 months behind because the government was closed, although they were still reporting prices. But the average beef prices, this is all beef, all cuts, from hamburger all the way up to T-bone steaks and so on, are averaging $9 a pound. So yeah, that's a 150% increase. And so people would say, wow, that seems like a big increase. But on the other hand, from a producer standpoint, fed cattle were $100 a hundredweight in 2020. Now they're $230, so that's a 230% increase in fed cattle. Or calves, and it's supply and demand. We have less beef now than beef production is down, and that the market, when the free market system is working, we don't have surpluses or shortages. The market clears the market, and so beef is clearing the market at $9 a pound. Yeah, some people can't afford T-bone steaks, but hamburger competes well with chicken and so on. So if you go to calves, hard to believe, but just in 2020, calf 550 6-weight steer calves in North Dakota were $155, and now, like we said last week, $438. So that's a 285% increase in prices. So all prices have went up, but it's, there isn't a conspiracy by somebody to raise prices or lower prices or anything else, or no one to blame. It's simply supply and demand. Those are the two things that affect the market. And the truth of the matter is, the least supply we have is at the lighter weight level of the calves. We had a bigger calf crop last year than we have this year, and so fed cattle haven't went up as much. And then beef prices, I think one thing that frustrates producers when they see, okay, the average price at the auction last week was 414. Now it's 438 today. And, even now with the information that we have, you might be sitting at an auction market and prices for about the same quality or such and such, and they may go down by the end of the day $5, or they might go up $5 depending on what the futures market is doing, because everybody's on their cell phones and we know what's happening all over the world. But anyway, it's supply and demand working appropriately as long as we don't fool with the price system. And so prices are higher, but again, we have a price cycle, and so prices go up or down, but prices at the retail level have not went up, as skyrocketed more than other things. It's just there's a lower supply of beef, and the consumers that are willing and able to pay that are paying it, so the system is working. And the other thing I guess that I should mention, prices move quickly now at the auction market level and so on, but the further up your chain you go, the less they move on a day-to-day basis, because, for instance, restaurants can't change their menu item every day or even every week, or don't even like to change it every month. And retail stores the same way. Yeah, they might have a sale, and so they put out a flyer, and that's good for a week, and so on. So prices tend to change less and again, that sometimes frustrates producers. My prices just went down $5 or $10 or whatever, but I went to the grocery store and maybe they're the same as they were. Why didn't that change? But it's just because that's the way our beef marketing and cattle marketing system works.
Thank you for adding that in there, because sometimes I did not think about that perspective at the restaurant level. Yeah. Okay, so the next question is, what are other countries' herd sizes like? And also with that, can we talk about the future of the U.S. markets? And of course, everyone's favorite question, how long is this bull market going to last? So that was kind of 3 in 1, but let's start with, what do other countries' herd sizes look like?
Yeah, okay, well, the U.S. is the largest beef producer in the world, but we don't have the most cattle. We're just the most efficient beef producer in the world. So actually, Brazil has more cattle than we do, and China has more cattle than we do, but we produce way more beef than China and more beef than Brazil does as well, because Brazil's system is more particularly steers out on grass for a couple years, and so they're a grass-based thing, and we move our cattle through quickly within about a year from when they're born, and maybe a little more. They go from being born to at the retail level, and that's because of grain feeding and the good genetics we have and so on. So the world beef cow herd has declined a little bit. Actually, in the U.S., our beef cow herd has declined the last 6 years as well, and this year probably we went up a little bit. But anyway, Australia is like 4th down on the list then, I guess, and they had a drought before we did, and so they reduced the herd, so they're back up to about normal. But actually, Brazil's cow numbers have went down a little bit in the last year or two. Brazil is breaking up pasture land and planting it to corn and beans, because they are exporting corn and beans like mad, and China is one of their good customers, and they've taken over some of our market. So their cow herd has went down a little bit. But in Europe, the cow herd has went down a little bit. In Argentina, the cow herd, and there's all kinds of political issues down there, and ours went down. So on a U.S. basis, the cow herd has fallen a little bit, but still we produce a lot of beef with the cow herd that we have. And even in the U.S., we'll maybe talk more about this, but yeah, we've went down for 6 straight years now, go up a little bit. But ever since 1975, our beef cow herd has been declining. Cyclically, it goes up and down, but each cyclical high is lower than the previous cyclical high, and that's going to happen this cycle. We're at low numbers now. We are going to rebuild a little bit, not up to where we were in 2019, the last cyclical high, because we don't need. We had record beef production in 2022, buoyed by a large cow slaughter, but also we're getting more efficient all the time. Carcass weights continue to go up every year, and so we get to a point where we have enough larger supplies of beef and the price comes down, and so that's kind of the way on the U.S. as well, or in the world as well. But we are not increasing the world supply of cattle.
Okay. Now, one of the subsequent questions within that question from this individual producer was, how long is it predicted that the bull market lasts?
Okay, yeah, that's a very, very good question, and some I know are remembering back to the last cyclical high in 2014 and 15, and then in 16 it really crashed, and is that going to happen again? Our expectations are, we had, although we're just starting herd rebuilding now, we had last January 1st is the big inventory report, and we had a historic low number of replacement heifers on hand because we were still coming out of drought and likely keep maybe not a lot more, but more heifer calves now. But that's kind of the way the cycle works. We all know the reproductive biology of cattle versus chickens. Chickens, earlier in the year, chicken prices were relatively high too, and now they've plummeted because they can put a whole bunch more eggs in, hatch them, and they've got chicken. But in beef, we keep a heifer calf back this fall, breed her, hopefully she breeds next summer, and hopefully she has a calf the next year, and hopefully the beef gets to market the next year. So it's a slow process. So we think, however, producers are more interested in prices. We think prices are going to level off for sure, and they usually do cyclically after. They aren't going to go up as much as they did. Calf prices are over $100 per hundredweight higher than they were last year at this time. Fed cattle $40 to $45 higher. They aren't going to go up that much again this year, but we think they're going to stabilize. A lot of things affecting the market now with the tariff situations and so on, and then the three biggest things that affect calf prices are fed cattle prices, particularly the futures in those distant months when those feeder cattle then will be slaughter weight, then corn prices and supply. So we know supply is going to be low. Fed cattle, there's some question mark there. They're still going to hold in there, but probably at near last year's levels. And then for feeder cattle, we don't know we've got a record corn crop this year, low corn prices, what's going to happen. So we think prices are going to level off and stay at similar levels, although by next fall, there's a chance they could be lower than they are now if we don't have a good corn crop. We have an excellent winter wheat crop going on now, and the Mexican border is closed to calves that usually come in and some of them at least graze that winter wheat, and so that's helping our calf market because it's domestic calves going on that winter wheat. We're at low supplies, and if we keep more heifer calves back, that's going to lower the supply of calves next year. So there's a lot of moving targets there, but we're going to be short supplied. Looks like fed cattle are going to hang in there, and then corn prices are kind of a question mark. So I think we've got another very good year. See how much we rebuild, but then it's going to be difficult to raise beef production. So I don't think for sure in 2026 they're not going to fall like they did back in 2016. We have a 10-year cycle there and hold in next year. Not saying that calf prices might be somewhat lower next fall, or they could be the same, or if we save a lot of heifers and we have an excellent corn crop and it rains and herd rebuilding, they could even be a little bit higher. But there's a limit, on the fed cattle side, there's a limit on how much higher beef prices can go at the retail level and at the fed cattle level. That's kind of a long answer for maybe what should have been a shorter answer, but that's kind of the situation.
No, I appreciate you touching on each of those different aspects. And in that, you brought up heifers, and that is the next question that was submitted. What is the outlook on the value of bred heifers?
Well, all classes of cattle are at record high levels now, including bred heifers. And I know the question is, what are they going to be next year? And so my answer to that is it going to rain throughout cattle country next year? And if it does, and we have very good moisture conditions, pretty much throughout cattle country now, all the way from Texas on up through North Dakota, even western North Dakota, has good conditions now. So that bodes well for bred heifer prices. They're always lower now in the fall than they are in the spring because they have to be wintered and so on. But I think, bred heifers are going to be in high demand this spring if our moisture conditions continue, and we are going to keep more heifers, I'm sure, this fall with the idea of replacement heifers. One thing is there's flexibility there in heifers is, we do keep usually background a lot of heifers and keep them in North Dakota, and then when spring gets here, then the decision is should we breed them or then go to the feedlot and so on. But just in general, we are going to keep more heifers with the idea of replacement heifers because our cow herd is low. Kind of interesting back to herd rebuilding and so on, and has herd rebuilding started? And it's USDA does that report every January, so we got to wait till January that we can see. But actually, last year, 6 of the top 10 cow-calf states, the large cow-calf states really start down in Texas, come right up to here. Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, 1, 2, 3, get up here. North Dakota's number 8, so South Dakota, Montana, and then North Dakota. 6 of those states increased cow numbers last year. We went up 10,000 head in North Dakota last year. But of those top 10, the 6 top 10 states went up 150,000 in cow numbers, but the rest of the country is really dry out west. There's dry over in some of the southeastern states and so on. So in the U.S. we went down 150,000 for the total U.S., but in the big cow-calf states we went up 150,000. So there was a demand for replacement heifers up here, and I think that is going to continue, and now the moisture conditions are even better throughout the U.S. than they were last year. So that bodes well for, higher bred heifer prices and bred cows for that matter.
Are you looking for new ways to beef up your favorite beef meals? Let me introduce you to my favorite seasoning, Pluck. I pluck my steaks, I pluck my burgers, I pluck my eggs, I pluck just about everything I cook because this variety of seasonings not only complements animal protein, but also allows me to incorporate organ meats into my diet without tasting them. You can try it for yourself at eatpluck.com and use the code Shaye for a 15% discount. That code is spelled SHAYEWANNER. And again, that website is eatpluck.com. So the final question we're going to talk about that was submitted by a producer, which you've touched on a little bit. It's 2 parts again. The first part is what is the drive on the upmarket, and the second is what is the outlook on U.S. cattle herd numbers.
Okay, well, the drive in the cattle market is, again, what I talked about before. There's 2 things that affect prices, and that's supply and demand. And from a supply standpoint, we are short, obviously, because of 6 straight years of a declining beef cow herd. And then the other thing that doesn't get a lot of attention is that beef demand has been very, very strong, stronger than many, given the economy and all the news about high grocery prices and everything else, and high interest rates, and consumers paying more for everything. Demand has held very, very well. Beef demand and all meat demand for that matter. And it kind of goes back, I think it was 10, 15 years ago, meat wasn't quite as in the vogue. There was talking about, high fat issues and we're going to eat less meat, and even doctors' recommendations now. And that's completely turned around. Now what's in vogue are high protein diets, keto diets, the GLP-1 medication and so on that goes along with high protein. Some people in the U.S. are watching their weight and have a weight problem, and meat funnels into that so well, and so we're back in vogue now, and like I said, we're clearing the market at $9 average of beef prices and enjoying it. One other thing that we do see, particularly on the beef side, because beef outside of lamb is the highest price meat that we have, but we're seeing And I think COVID weighed into this, but we're seeing some movement, maybe those high price steaks at the restaurant, some backing off on those, but more buying beef either at retail stores or even locally and cooking them at home. You can pay probably around, restaurants have to charge for the everything they have, the overhead, the ambience, all their overhead, it goes into the price of steaks. Where if you buy one and cook it at home, it's basically throwing the meat, so probably a third of the price for a very good steak at home. So we're seeing a lot of interest in home cooking of steaks, and still then very affordable from what if you were going to eat those at a restaurant. I'm not bad mouthing restaurants or anything else. They have to charge what they have to charge, and restaurants are still very busy. You go to the Longhorn in Bismarck and you wait a half an hour just to get in, I think, and the last time I was there, which is just a month or so ago. So it's not only low supplies, but its beef demand is very strong. That's what's driving the market. Two best things that could happen: strong demand and lower supplies that affect prices. And then about the herd, we kind of talked about that. Yeah, we're going to increase the herd somewhat if we can. If it rains, we've already done it in 6 out of the top 10 states and probably continue to do that this year. The January inventory report will come out January 31st when we'll get a handle. It's not going to be a huge increase in beef cow numbers. It's just, could increase some, maybe more so by a year from now, by January of 2027, if our moisture conditions continue and we have kept more replacement heifers and bred more and so on. So yeah, we're in the early stages of modest herd rebuilding.
All right. Well, Tim, as we kind of wrap up today, do you have any resources you would like to share with listeners?
Yeah, we do have a lot of resources, and some are aware of this and maybe some aren't. Our department, and we're interested in yours prices and so on. So our extension agribusiness department, which I'm part of, there are 6 of us in the department. So we all published a newsletter called Ag by the Numbers. It comes out once a month. It's emailed to you free. There's a long website, so if you just Google NDSU Ag by the Numbers, you can get on that mailing list. I write an article, and my counterpart on the grain marketing side, Frayne Olson, and input costs, and we cover all those in that. We do also a corresponding webinar once a month if people want to keep track. That's called our Ag Market Situation and Outlook webinar. It's always on Thursday after the World Agriculture and Supply and Demand Estimates report. This week it comes out on Thursday, and that's an hour long. Again, just Google NDSU Ag Outlook webinar, and the link will be emailed, and once you're on the list, so you can listen to that once a month. We also have a website, a livestock economics website. Just Google NDSU Livestock Economics, and there we have lots of resources, for instance, budgets that producers can use when they go to their lender, talking about next year. We have a cow-calf budget on there. We have a backgrounding budget on there, summer grazing budget, and I think it's on there, but just developing we just talked about bred heifers, a bred heifer decision tool and a decision tool. Should I keep an open cow versus selling her and buying back a bred heifer? All those on that livestock economics website. And then I think it just became active about a week or so ago. All my animal science and our ag economists, we did a backgrounding webinar thing, and 5 of us were on that, and we each did about a half an hour segment. I did on livestock prices, but Brian Parma did one on all different budgets for different market classes, and Carl Hoppe did rations, and Lacey Quayle did heifer development and so on, and Jake, our veterinarian, talked about health. And so just Google NDSU backgrounding, and those are on YouTube, 5 different, about half hour. So lots of resources out there. We try to keep up with everything. So those are a few that I could mention.
Okay. Now, I will say, I know this was not on our list today, but it is a current event, and I know we're recording a few weeks out, do you want to touch on New World screwworm in the border or Argentine beef? And I ask because I know those are top of mind, and you touched on supply and demand matter most, but people are concerned. So
that's a very good question, and that's the reason why the futures market has been so volatile. The futures market does not like uncertainty, and we know what the cash market is. That's current supply and demand conditions, but the futures market job is to predict into the future, and the futures market does not like uncertainty. So, an issue is that talk about opening or lowering the tariff rate quota on Argentina beef. And so that got the market jittery. The Mexican border is closed right now. We would be getting 25 to 30,000 feeder cattle a week into the U.S. And so, yes, our supplies are down because of that. We mentioned winter wheat. I had a 76% tariff on Brazilian beef. I think that got lowered. The information is just coming out on some news. I think the president lowered the 10% tariff he put across the board. And so that's got the futures market very, very jittery. So yes, we're likely not going to get a lot of more beef from Argentina. Again, their cow herd went down a little bit last year. They're exporting all their meat now. They export a lot of it to China. We're locked out of China is another thing that affects prices. So we just did sign an agreement with China. It was soybeans was the big topic there. But we're still locked out of China, and so that could, even if we would get back into China, that could be another market for our beef going there. And so all these issues are causing the futures market to be so jittery. And yes, by next year, the Mexican border, it may well be open because we're, producing sterile fruit flies and doing that. And the Mexican cattle producers want the border to be open. And even our southern feedlots would like the border to be open because they're dependent on Mexican cattle. So, we're in the northern plains here, and it's helping our calf prices. But, the beef industry, even in the U.S., is very diverse from, southern plains feedlots to central and so on. So that's got the futures market very, very, very jittery, and things could happen. The Mexican border could be open by next fall, and things could be back to normal in terms of all kinds of trade. More beef to China would help our prices, but more beef from possibly Brazil maybe would. So a lot of moving targets there, and again I tell producers, let's just watch that cash market. We're at record high levels now. Don't lose sleep over the limit movements. One problem I know that we do have with the futures market being so jittery, when we have a limit movement in the feeder cattle futures, then the livestock risk protection that a lot of producers are using now, and I know we're just entering the backgrounding season, and some are wanting to use livestock risk protection because prices are high but very volatile for the calves that come out in March or April or whatever. When we have a limit movement, then there's no LRP. That's just part of the policies there. So it causes a lot of consternation to us, but things are going to straighten out, I think, as long as we let supply and demand work and we don't do adverse things to affect that. The market figures things out in a hurry, and I think most livestock producers are happy with that and let the market work. And I know we have a cycle and so on. So yeah, but there's just too much uncertainty now that the futures market is trying to digest into the future, that the big funds were into both feeder cattle and live cattle big time throughout the year because the only name in town going up was cattle, live cattle and feeder cattle. Beans were going down, corn was going down a record, crops and both, and they're struggling, and the funds like to get into something exciting, so they got into feeder cattle, and they got into live cattle futures, and they drove them way up, and the open interest, which is the number of open contracts, went just about doubled, and now it's coming back down and maybe to a more normal number there, and that's caused the market to come down because all those speculators have left the market. And so maybe in some respects, you can argue, is that good or bad, that the market goes up too much with all that speculative activity, or it goes down too much? And so, if you're using that as a price risk management tool, for something you have to sell, if it goes up too much, well, maybe that's good. Or on the other hand, if you're buying feeder cattle futures for feedlots placing, if they would go down too much, maybe that gives you some alternative, but it's very tough to do. But I think maybe some of those funds getting out of the market might be okay, that might be into the future, cause less jittering. I don't know now because the WASDE report came out Friday and was somewhat bearish, but they bailed out of cattle and jumped into beans. So beans go up $1 because of all that speculative activity, but cattle come down $20 or whatever. But now, I think we're back more at kind of normal activity there, and maybe that'll bode well for us for a little bit less volatility, but still a lot of moving parts here.
All right. I appreciate you taking the time to visit with me today.
Okay, well, my pleasure.
Well, for those of you out there listening, I will try to include some of those links to any resources mentioned into the show notes. If not, you heard Tim mention them. Go search them, check them out. They are great resources. Remember, the best way to support this podcast, as well as any other podcast, is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this information interesting and valuable, because podcasts still grow best by word of mouth. But with that, happy ranching, folks.